According to the founding fathers here in this country, we have clear predications in the city of Washington, D.C., and through the Masonic order that the United States was designated as the new Atlantis, the new world headquarters. And we even commemorated this on our currency on the back of the $1 bill. It says, Annuit Coeptus Order, Novus Seclorum Order. Okay, so what that translates to mean is he approves of our undertakings. Well, who's the he that's being referred to? Some high-level entity that's representative of a triangle on an unfinished pyramid. Well, we know where the symbology comes from. It comes from Egypt, which is Enki's domain, and it ties directly in with that cast of characters that were on the Anunnaki Council. One has to consider that Anu had two sons, Enlil and Enki. One represented creation, and one represented destruction.
Yeah.
Now, in the big scheme of things, creation and destruction happen at the same time, and they have to be in balance. So imagine having a kid that's a creator, one that's a destroyer. Well, that's what's going on. The one who's the creator, his offspring are taking over the council, the head of the new Atlantis, right here in the United States. But before that happens, there's going to be 7 years of cleanup before the new world order is rolled out. And that's what you're seeing right before your very eyes.
Are we going to win?
The forces of Enki do win, and the forces of Enlil get judged according to the Lost Book of Enoch, and their energy gets recycled.
Is this tied into the Book of Revelation?
Absolutely it is. That's the Christian version of very much the same thing that was said in the Lost Book of Enoch about end of days and the judgment to come. And Enlil is judging his people right now.
Well, I got to ask you about Egypt.
What's that?
The pyramids. I mean, who helped build those? Did the Anunnaki do that?
Well, it's very clearly stated that the Anunnaki, and we know exactly which one did it and when. And I put this in my book as well.
Tell me.
Well, in the Emerald Tablets, Thoth the Atlantean, in the very opening of the document, says, I built the pyramids for the people of Chem in Egypt, and blah, blah, blah. He clearly specifies it. And during the age of Leo, he did this, which was about 10,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE. That was the age of Leo. When he did this, he put his face on there on the body of a lion to commemorate the age of Leo. So we know Thoth built the Giza pyramid. We know what he used it for. And
energy source,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were using this as a waypoint on the 30th parallel to go along with their space facilities. There weren't any real high land navigation marks.
How do we know at this point, Gerald, that they're even still around on Nibiru? How do we know something hasn't happened to that planet, some kind of catastrophe?
Well, it looks like they were fighting a losing battle. And so when you read in the canonical Bible where it's talking about the kingdom of heaven coming to earth, they weren't kidding. The kingdom of heaven and Niburu are synonymous terms. And some of them never left. They stayed here. Enlil stayed. His son Ninurta stayed. Nanarsin stayed. Ninhartsog stayed, who was the mother of humanity. Isis, that was her other name. They stayed here, and they said they stayed. They were committed to, kind of this advanced, planetary colonization plan that they initially started, and apparently they had what they needed here, and whether it's going to be their full-on Niburian new capital, the new Atlantis, like they've specified, or it's just an outpost, it's not really clear to me, but clearly they're coming, and they're definitely asserting themselves, and they're in charge. So there's plenty of evidence that the New World Order is rolling out. It's right here in San Diego, right on the Interstate 8 going out of town. We have illegal Homeland Security checkpoints that'll stop you.
Oh, they're everywhere.
With no probable cause. They're all across the country.
They're everywhere.
The sovereignty of all nations is being eliminated.
David Icke believes that a lot of leaders are from other planetary systems, that they're the offspring, the genetic offspring. What do you think of that theory?
Well, I kind of agree. I mean, and I'll give you two examples from our recent past. In 2900 BCE, Gilgamesh was a genetic offspring. He was a demigod. He was three-quarters Anunnaki, and that disturbed him a lot. Atrahasis was 50%, and in that account, he actually got to partake of the elixirs of life and became immortal, and that's why Gilgamesh sought him out. So they were here, and Gilgamesh lived a very, very long time. Found his grave. I wonder who's been looking at his DNA. It's not been shared with you or I, George, has it?
No, not at all.
So imagine that the proper zodiacal ruler is coming, and he's a peaceful one, and before he can actually be allowed to assert himself and take over, the forces of destruction have to get they got to get their culling first. Well, that's what's happening, because we know quite well that the Anunnaki Council is going to be occupied by Ningshita, Thoth, Jesus, as predicted. He's Enki's son that's in line to do this. And like I said, with the changes in the zodiac, going from Pisces to Aquarius, and by the way, who was the water bearer? Enki was the lord of the waters, as assigned to him by
Okay, and I'm curious, too, on the Greek mythology, how this echoed, the Sumerians, with different names, of course.
Well, that's exactly it. And in my book, in Table 9, I show a table to see what they were called, and I have an Anunnaki Council of 12 as of 3760 BCE with their names and their ranks, and what they were called in Niburu, what they were called in Sumer, what they were called in Greece, and what they were called in Rome. And once you know that, then you go, oh, geopolitically what's happening in the world right now, it's not so mysterious. You can see their handiwork and what's going down, because there were clear delineations of how they did not get along.
So are you saying that they migrated to Greece?
Absolutely. Zeus
They left Samaria.
Enki was Poseidon.
Okay, so they left Samaria and they went to Greece.
Hermes was Ningshita.
Yes. What made that move? Why did they do
Well,
that?
I think part of the nuclear assault on the spaceport, because this evil wind contaminated the waters, it killed the plants, according to the lamentations and the documents, and they migrated east because the prevailing winds were from the west. So the radiation cloud would be going right across the Tigris and Euphrates, right down in Mesopotamia if they hit it on the Sinai, like they said.
I would assume that the nuclear war that they had tells you that that kind of energy put into that kind of bomb is as big as you can get in the universe. Is that true?
Wow.
Or is there something else out there?
Well, listen, in the Enuma Elish, they described weapons that they were using to change planetary courses.
Whoa.
And all kinds of things, yeah, in their creation account that was read every spring in Babylon.
So they would be able to dwarf nuclear
they had blood
energy.
weapons. They had weapons that would split a planet. Their control of energy and matter was way beyond where we are.
A planet splitter?
Yeah.
I bet they've done that then.
Well, listen, something amazing to me occurred when I found out when I was looking at the constellations. You've heard of the design number Phi, which is 1.618. Have you not?
Yeah, well, I've heard about it.
Yeah.
Don't know what the heck it does.
It comes from the Fibonacci sequence.
Okay.
But whatever. But it shows up as a ratio in our bodies and sunflowers, all kinds of animals. Well, it shows up in the heavens, too. If you take the orbit of the Earth and divide it by Venus, you get exactly 1.618. So in the Enuma Elish, and that's one of the three seminal documents I referred to, is they described exactly what they were capable of from an energy standpoint.
Let's get into some of your work with energy and matter.
Okay.
In your opinion, Tesla was getting very close to bringing energy right out of the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
He stopped because he was forced to stop. He couldn't. Right. They couldn't figure out how are we going to make money doing this
exactly.
on free energy.
Right.
Now they're talking about not having plugs in our homes anymore. That the appliances will merely run off of an electrical signal.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we headed here with energy?
Well, first of all, let's state an energy principle. It's neither created nor destroyed. It only changes state. That's very important to people that are, I don't know, have a devoid a creator account as a physicist. There's their afterlife account. Your energy isn't created or destroyed. It's just going to change state. So what are we looking at? What do we know about electricity and magnetism? Well, we've used it to set up communications and transportation systems. We've done all kinds of things with radio and TV, but we've never really talked about how it affects humans and what the interaction of energy and matter with humans is. So energy and matter, I actually would consider this consciousness in human energy, because they're really synonymous. If you look into how we're formed with nerve ganglia up a central electrical pole, that's our spine, and a cavity resonator-looking sacrum with holes in it, very strange for an engineer to see something like that. Anyway, so in consciousness and energy, it's really about where energy meets matter, and that's an off-limits area generally for the government.
Now, human beings can generate what I call human energy. You do too.
Mm-hmm.
How powerful is that?
Well, it's not really that powerful. It's measurable, and I've actually purchased something called a resonant field imaging system. It's a handheld meter with a high-amplitude antenna that you can put close to somebody along their chakras. It reads the frequency, you write it down, it converts it to a wavelength, and you can show them as color on a computer. Okay? So there's the frequency aspect of it. But then there's the whole aspect of photons and their interaction with the human bioenergy. And this was a field that Dr. Harry Oldfield was looking into and developed some software to allow that to occur, because when photons interact with the weak electromagnetic field, they're changed, their course is altered. And so this shows up as a chroma deviation in digital video. It's called polycontrast interference photography, and I actually am one of the licensed scientists investigators in the United States to use that technology.
What's the next major breakthrough in the field of energy? What's going to happen?
Well, I think we relatively understand energy and matter pretty well. I mean, there's lots of breakthroughs in terms of commercialization to get off fossil fuels and things like that. So I think there will be probably direct energy like Tesla technology, so that you're not being charged for energy. As a matter of fact, if you're pioneering enough, you can set up a system for yourself now. I have a little solar generator that I take out when I go camping and things like that. And the next thing I'm looking at is augmenting that with something that may work without the sun.
Well, I don't know. Can something work without the sun?
Well, the wind generators have been out there, but the electromagnetic field is ever-present. It's everywhere.
Don't you think that the big energy companies suppress this?
Well, of course.
And we'll never get this.
Well, I see. This is really kind of comes down to your perspective about what's happening with the New World Order as it rolls out.
So did you ever think when you were getting your degree in engineering and computer engineering that you'd be touching these things?
No, but somewhere along the line, when I was over in Hawaii, I started applying the laws of physics to myself. And that's when everything started changing, and I really started believing the chakras and energy, and started getting the equipment to visualize this. And my clients in structural integration, for 7 years, they were saying, this was happening to them. And I finally got the software so I could see it. There's a direct correlation between the human structure and energy. And energy is consciousness, as every case states, clearly.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I think if people learn how to tap into that, they can do some incredible things.
Exactly. Well, we know people have been stretching themselves and doing yoga and stuff like that for thousands of years, and they claim to have activated their crown chakra or their pineal gland and experienced blissful states.
They don't teach this in college, Gerald.
No, but I sure put it in my book, because how energy and matter interacts with your body, I got exposed to while I was working in an artificial intelligence company. And it's quite amazing how the electromagnetic spectrum can be used to induce a thought in a human.
Gerald, where does Atlantis fall into any of this?
Well, Atlantis, as I mentioned, in the teachings of Solon to Plato, recorded in the Critias, Solon was trying to find out his ancestry, and he did this by going to Sais in Egypt and meeting a priest who told him his ancestry. And that's where I found out that Poseidon, Enki, had been assigned Atlantis by his father. Okay? So now we see that there's a connection from Sumeria into Greece via Atlantis. Because they then, once Atlantis had problems, and during the last ice age, clearly all of the cities along the eastern Atlantic there and along the Mediterranean, where they were sunken, was due to the rising waters from the ice age and the ice melting. So his city was sunk. He moved to Greece, and his arch nemesis, Angramayu, who was Enlil, was there too, and his city was Pergamum. And if you go back to the writings in the New Testament, talking about where Antipas died and where the seat of Satan was. This is in Revelations. They clearly state it was at Pergamum, the seat of Satan. Well, the Temple of Zeus was in Pergamum, and it was moved to the city of Berlin. So there's the connection from Atlantis to Greece. And then, because of this concept of this new Atlantis being the United States, as recorded on the back of our $1 bill, this tells me that the foundings of the United States were to be the New World Order, but it was for Enki, not Enlil. But Enlil clearly infiltrated Atlantis from his Cretan base with his pirate marauders, and so pretty much everywhere Enki went, Enlil came behind and brought wrath and destruction.
Are they seeders of planets?
They certainly are. Absolutely, they are.
I could see that happening.
Mm-hmm.
So they're gone. Some may be here. What's next?
Well, I believe they're here. I believe that two of them have been given the reins to reign in the New Order, meaning they've got to reign in the destruction, just like the Revelations account says. Okay, right. Zeus and Apollo are Enlil and Ninurta.
Okay,
and Zeus has plans to take over the highest religious organization, and he's called the false prophet.
And you're saying Zeus is still around after all these
He
years?
absolutely is.
It's talking 450,000 years.
Yeah, well, listen to this. I'm going to blow your mind a little bit. Here's the first ruler from the Sumerian king list. After the kingship descended from heaven, Niburu, the kingship was in Eridu. Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. This is recorded by Berossus. I brought this back from the Library of Congress, where I got it directly myself.
How could they live so long?
Well, it had to do with the Starfire gold and the findings that the Nobel Peace Prize was just awarded these scientists. It has to do with the telomeres.
But I'm sure they would die if something happened, if they got shot or something.
They did.
Like that.
As a matter of fact, Marduk was killed, and he was entombed in Babylon when Alexander the Great went there to take the hand of Marduk when he showed up in Babylon, and he was already dead. So it was about 484 BCE. Marduk was dead.
So they do die.
Mm-hmm. But guess what? They can come back.
What do you mean they can come back?
Just a body. It's just a body.
Oh, they come back reincarnated?
Absolutely.
By their own admission?
Well, Hermes Trismegistus was reincarnated 3 times, as he told in the Emerald Tablets himself. He was a master of human energy somehow. It's just amazing. In these Sumerian accounts, Batanish was lured to the Shuruppak city. Enki impregnated her. She had Noah, who was Atrahasis. He's all called Zeusudra in the Sumerian accounts. He actually was the king of Shuruppak after 600 years of the primitive man worker program of breeding. In the Atrahasis account, that's where Enlil started asserting himself, trying to wipe out humans. In the same account in the Bible, canonical Bible, Noah was the king of Shuruppak. After 600 years, that's when the flood occurred, if you read in Genesis account. So they were coincident, and they do corroborate well. So he was 50% Anunnaki because the mitochondrial DNA didn't get passed to him. Enki was his father, and the woman, Batanash, was a human, a primitive worker. But on the Mount Ararat account, in the Atrahasis, it's tablet of 11, where Enlil, while the flood is overtaking the humans, they look down and see that somebody got away. And Enlil's furious. And he declares, "We, the great Anunna, swore an oath that no life was to survive this flood." And they land there, and it turns out that it's Zeusudra, who was called Utnapishtim. He got renamed by Enlil on site because of probably his guilt for what he did. And this is very, very vivid Sumerian details about what happened on that account. And it looks like that Atrahasis, who is Zeusudra, got access to the plant of longevity that the Niburians were controlling. And so even though he was 50% DNA, a Niburian, he actually got eternal life.
Would you want eternal life, Gerald?
It depends on whether I had responsibilities with it or not. Would I, knowing what I know now? I think I would want a long lifetime to at least make the changes, knowing what I know in the world, so that we weren't living in such a fallen state.
I'd want a long life only if I could make, an impact and change things.
That's right. I'd want to be able.
I wouldn't want to go through this same thing.
No, I wouldn't want to be in a fallen state, suffering, genetically dumbed down, being, suppressed in our consciousness from every kind of chemical, every kind of electromagnetic signal they can throw at us. It's, the idea of the evolution of consciousness was the key central point all through my book, from the very time that the GG mutinied to the time that Enlil kept time after time preventing them from having access to anything that gave them higher consciousness.
I was wondering, I know you mentioned God, but where was Jesus? What happened to Jesus? I mean, was he just kind of, and I don't want to get in bad saying this, but was he just kind of a fairy tale during all of this?
No, I don't think, I think the Anunnaki were long gone by the time Jesus came on the scene, Gerald.
Well, I've kind of got a different view of that. You realize that Enlil had taken over Rome, and through Constantine had subverted the Christian religion into this thing that they did. It was nothing like that until Constantine got a hold of it. Well, given that state, the primitive workers' consciousness was still being severely repressed by Enlil. And at that point, from the Ahura Mazda domain in Persia, recall that some magi were dispatched at Jesus' birth. You have to ask yourself why they came from Persia. Well, it's very clear that Enki had performed a ritual called the Dying Rising God ritual that was going on in Egypt to dispense a frequency to these dumbed-down, genetically disabled primitive workers, to throw them a line so they could figure out how to evolve their energy body and take on the consciousness that they were designed to have.
Next.
Enki threw him the rope, threw Ningshita, his son, Jesus, who was absolutely the bearer, the caduceus, the healer, and it was very, very clear. And even Edward Case corroborated that for me. It was very, very hard to pin down who Jesus was for me. That was the hardest one of all. It took me over 9 years to get good with that.
Are you sure you're right?
I'm absolutely right. I know inside and out I'm right.
That would shake things up, you know
Yes,
that.
it will. Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Yet he did have these mystical powers, didn't he?
Well, you read about the powers of Ningshita that were described to him by his father as he was describing to Enki. He had the powers of resurrection, of healing. He had extreme powers of energy and matter. In the Atrahasis account itself, they had a ritual where Enki had taken the energy out of one being and put it into another one. I mean, they had extreme control over energy matter, way beyond what we understand.
They must have liked this planet, Gerald. They stayed a long time.
Yeah. So I hope I answered Vicky's question about what Jesus did, what Ningshita did. This dispensation of energy that lands in the ganglion of Impar in your sacrum and becomes this kundalini energy that wakes up your quantized 7 chakras is real. They gave it to us as a gift, and the fact that it's been suppressed until it came out of India to the United States just recently ought to tell you something.
How accurate do you think Zechariah Sitchin was in his work on the Anunnaki?
Well, I've read all his stuff, and I know that with that plethora of knowledge that he went after, I mean, the published works, what he did in his lifetime is just astounding. To make a few mistakes in there, yeah, I expect that. But the reality is, in the big picture, he was right on the money. Whether, this cylinder seal was a star or a sun is pretty immaterial given the physical and all the other astrological and tangible evidence that we got out of Sumer. They gave us all of the civilizations first. I think Zechariah Sitchin did more for illuminating humanity relative to the ancient astronaut theory than anyone on this planet. Well, I really just stayed with the original source documents. And I'll mention them again. Stephanie Donnelly, in her World Oxford Press Myths of Mesopotamia book, put all 3 of these accounts in there on purpose. The Atrahasis, the Enuma Elish, the Epic Gilgamesh. Why? It told all of our Genesis account. It told you who the players were involved and how they related to one another. There wasn't any mystery, nothing left out. If you did nothing but read the Atrahasis, all 11, 12 tablets of it, it's there. And it's in the Old Babylonian, it's in Akkadian. They have several versions of it. The cuneiform has been digitized. We have a uniform script code that you can load on your computer and have those fonts that are cuneiform text. There's not an interpretation problem anymore.
It's interesting that so many cultures all talk about the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Well, as mentioned, it seems to me that the Anunnaki were rolling out civilization to mankind iteratively. And at some point in the past, the Ajiji broke off and were rolling out things that they were not supposed to give humanity. Weapons making, messing with DNA. Apparently they perverted a lot of animal DNA as well. They made a mess, basically.
Hi, George.
Howdy.
Y'all just barely touched on the electromagnetic field. If we were able to go wireless in our homes, could he go into that a little more? Because all the cell towers and everything they're putting up seems to affect. I have,
Oh, yeah.
so many cases of cancers now and everything. Could you go into that just a little more?
All this bombardment has got to affect us.
Yeah, actually, I spend a chapter on energy and matter and what frequencies they interact with us. Think about yourself as mostly water. We know if you put water in a microwave, you can hit it with 2.4 gigahertz and it'll start getting hot. So certain frequencies interact with matter and certain ones just pass right through it. So if you look at the ones that where there is an interaction and there's a law of conservation of energy that has to take place there, then you can account for where all that energy goes. So if you got energy being absorbed in a human, that can be measured. What we do know about electricity and magnetism is that the magnetic fields, in some cases, being touted by people as the healing mechanism, and other people are saying it's causing brain damage, having your cell phone too close to your head. There's plenty of scientific evidence to show that if you have a high enough radiating antenna and it's impacting, and there's a law of conservation of energy thing going on where you're absorbing some of it, which can be measured, then there could be damage.
Oh, it's bound to affect people.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're getting bombarded with all this and even newer technology, then if they go wireless all over the place, it could have a detrimental effect on people.
Right. the most detrimental effect is what it's having on your brain waves, because your brain only operates from 0 to 20 hertz. So if you've got a low-frequency source that's operating at 0 to 20 hertz and you're close enough where its amplitude is higher than your brainwave amplitude, guess what? You're going to get jammed.
Gerald, your background in engineering, did that help you with some of your research into the Anunnaki?
Well, it did, especially as it came to looking at the design constraints that would have had to happen if you were to implement energy and matter in a being. How would you control them if you gave them intelligence? So I looked at how the electromagnetic spectrum could be used by these advanced beings and to control their large populations of miners, city builders. I mean, consider the problem. How would you control them? So from an electromagnetic standpoint, I started looking at the features of the brain to see how this could be done. I doubt seriously they were running around these mines with Motorola headsets and taking their orders. I think it was these advanced beings and their knowledge of the electromagnetic spectrum and the fact that they had an opportunity to design us. They made it so that if we were having thoughts or doing anything that was going to lead to a mutiny, they could certainly use telemetry to snoop in on it and avert it. That would have been a primary design constraint, given the fact that GG mutant in the first place.
My question for your guest tonight would be, as far as markers for the Anunnaki, with blood types and O negative being a universal donor, would they have had something to do with that? Or, I mean, if it was just who was here, wouldn't it just be one blood type? So they had to do a lot of experimenting. And that was my question. I'll take my answer off here. Thank you very much, George, and keep up the great work.
Okay. They have experimented a lot, haven't they?
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, I'm not an expert on blood types, so I probably won't touch that one. The degree of sophistication that they used in designing us is quite amazing. I mean, it's really quite amazing. So it turns out, with blood types, for instance, there seems to be a propensity toward certain foods. Was that intentional? I don't know. There's a whole segment of the community that's looking at blood type diets now.
Go back and tell us a little bit about the Adam and Eve. What happened, and what do you think the story of the devil, Satan, the snake, how did that come about?
You like that one, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Well, originally, in the Trehasis account, they decided to create primitive workers by non-procreation. It was in vitro fertilization. They would do the mixing in the tube, put it into the womb of one of the Babylonian birth goddesses. They started out with 7, and they weren't producing enough offspring. That's when Ningshita Jesus Thoth, I'm just going to keep saying the AKA list so people get it. That's when he interceded. He was a premier scientist with his symbol of Caduceus. He gives them the ability to procreate. They were taken back out of Africa, of the house of Shimti, back up to Eridu into the Garden of Eden. Okay, this is a Sumerian word. It's E-D-I-N. Okay, we spell it Eden in the Bible. But it was there, right in Eridu, in southern Iraq. They get there. They're put into the garden to be observed. Enki and Enlil are there in the Sumerian account. And they're being monitored to see if they were successful at procreating. They're watching their primitive workers see if they can have babies. Okay, and in that account, they apparently had the plant of life and the plant of knowledge of good and evil, and they had plenty of advanced plants in the garden in Eridu. I was surprised they had the plant that would allow these primitive workers to enhance their consciousness. That's the key point here. Mm-hmm. So at that point, Enlil, Jehovah, tells them, if you eat this plant, you will surely die. This is in the Genesis account, right?
Was it poison?
Well, he's just telling them, if you eat this, you're going to die, period. And then they go and they do it, and all of a sudden they become sentient beings with awareness. And Enki
he lied to them.
Comes on and he says, guess what? No, you won't die. You'll become aware of yourself, and you'll become gods like us. So it was always about the suppression of human consciousness. Enki told the truth and was demonized. Enlil lied and was promoted as the monotheistic god to the Hebrews.
I'm curious, though, about the story that ended up in Genesis. Mm-hmm. How you think that all came about? The ability to record that story.
Well, if you now take the flood account from the Sumerian documents and all the documents that were in Babylon, that was Marduk's location for all the scribes and priests were trained there for doing lingual arts. Okay, the documents. Well, the Jewish people were being held captive, including the priests, in Babylon about 330 BCE. Well, they got to see these Sumerian documents and all the creation accounts. And in their attempt to placate Enlil, I'm just going to say it the way it happened, they took the plethora of creators that were on the Anunnaki Council, or the Anunnaki Council. There were only two creators, is Enki and his half-sister, and then Hardzog, or Isis. And they wrote an account, which became the Torah, that completely lied, monotheisticized Enlil, and left everybody else out. But they messed up and didn't quite get the lingual part just right, because they messed up and forgot to turn the let us and create man in our image and our likeness, and turn that into a singular form. Whoops. And there were several flips like that.
Big whoops.
Yeah, look at the Genesis 4 and Genesis 6 count of from Adam to Noah. How different are those? What a bunch of lies.
Yeah, I was just wondering, this planet that the Anunnaki come from, I'd like to know something about solar radiation, temperature, atmosphere, availability of water.
What do we know of that, Mr. Clark?
Well, I didn't get a lot of that. We knew that it was 4 times the size of Earth.
They had to have water.
It was a brown dwarf. Clearly, they had access to water. Whether they were getting it from local planets or had it on their planet, we don't know. From their account, it was in a retrograde orbit, elliptical orbit that took 3,600 years, a SAR, according to them, which all of the Sumerian kings lists were recorded in SARs, okay, which is periods of 3,600 years. When it came into close apogee with the sun, apparently, or close perigee with the sun, the solar radiation was quite intense. They were clearly bolstering their atmosphere with ionized gold. Actually, in prehistory Niburu, there were discussions about whether to use ionized gold or to fire nuclear weapons into the existing volcanoes to use, or more localize the source to get something to shield them from the radiation. So that was going on about 450,000 years ago, according to the timeline with Sitchin and the genealogy table I put together.
But if they were like us, they had to have had a lot of water on that planet.
Well, they didn't mention much about water in the records I have.
How could
and
they
I
live without it?
I have an ancient estimate reading list in the back of my book, which I haven't even read all of them. There's just so many documents. There's tens of thousands of them out there. But probably there are some in there that talk about the resource. As a matter of fact, Enoch, Thoth, was taken when he was 365 years old to Niburu, and he was taught everything about the heavens and the workings of the planets, according to the Lost Book of Enoch. Really amazing read.
This unrealistic age of the personalities of the New Testament is explainable by realizing that they were using a calendar based on the monthly cycles of the moon rather than the annual cycles of the sun. Therefore, if you divide the 900 years or 840 years by 12, you get 70 years, which becomes realistic, and that would apply to all these time periods, I believe.
Well, actually, I've considered that as well, and I looked at how they came up with their time systems. Secretary Sitchin wrote a wonderful book on the cosmic code and when time began, especially when time began. Originally, very cleverly, the Anunnaki related their Niburian time and their orbit time to our Earth by our precessional wobble. That's why the zodiac and the 12th house of the zodiac and knowledge of our inclined axis and this wobble is so amazing. And in 3760 BCE, they then relegated the Nippurian calendar as the new calendar, and that was the beginning of the Jewish calendar as well. So that's when they stopped relating time from Niburu to time on Earth. So I disagree that they were converting months into days, and that's how those times came up. Also, if you go back to the Genesis account and the ages from Adam to Noah, including Methuselah and even Enoch himself, they were hundreds and hundreds. Some of them were over almost 1,000 years old. Well, that's nothing compared to the time frames shown in the Sumerian Kings list. The first 8 rulers themselves ruled for 241,200 years. They named them in terms of SARs, and a SAR was specifically 3,600 years listed in the Atrahasis. So I don't think there's an interpretation problem.
I find that hard to believe that the entity could live that.
It comes down to the telomeres. Look, a red oak in Northern California will live forever unless it's destroyed by a storm.
No, that's true.
Our DNA degrades because the telomeres at the end of our chromosomes cannot maintain their state without a proper amount of telomerase to keep them from getting degraded. That's what causes aging. Otherwise, we would live in perpetuity, just like the Anunnaki were doing.
Could you describe differences between the deities and the things they held in their hand and what they might mean to us today?
Certainly. I'll start with the caduceus because I think that's the most important one. This was a healer symbol of two entwined serpents around a central pole with a knob on top with lateral wings coming out of it. As Ningshita's symbol and Enki's as well, what did it represent? The central pole is your spine. It's an electrical conduit. The top of it is a pineal gland right on the top. The serpents entwined around it represent the double helix of your DNA, and they're going upwards for a reason because it's emanating from the ganglion and impar, which is your negative pole of your energy body. It's in the bottom of your sacrum, your coccyx bone. Okay? When the energy is released from that point, representing the entwined serpents rising up, that energy going through the quantized 7 chakras of your body are quantized consciousness levels. Well, when it reaches the top, it hits the pineal gland, which then releases what's called dimethyltryptamine, and it's enclosed in your brain. Your brain produces the most powerful hallucinogen on the planet, according to Dr. Strassman, who experimented with clients to see what was going on there. And so I encourage you to read that, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, by Dr. Strassman. He was right here in San Diego, by the way.
They made us that way, didn't they?
Yeah, so this symbol, let me finish. So when that energy, this energy that animates all matter, and it's very related to gravity, by the way, when it reaches your pineal gland and releases DMT, you're on a chemical to electromagnetic conversion where you can go back and forth. So thoughts can be converted to electromagnetic spectrum and back and forth through this chemical transduction of DMT. They call it the spirit molecule for that reason. Now, once that happens, according to the Hermes teachings in the Hermetic tradition, the lateral ventricles of the brain then start to come alive, and it gives you the wings of Hermes. So all of a sudden, you've reached a consciousness level that they recognize as being the sons of God. And that's what they were teaching along the mystery schools all along the Nile. And it was headed up by none other than Ningshita himself, boss.
What do you guys think about the idea of Noah's Ark being an actual gene storage place for animals, not a place where they actually live?
Perfect. Very possible.
Listen, I'll give it to you in one answer in the Lost Book of Enki. That's clearly the case. They didn't put a bunch of animals on there. They went out all over the earth and were gathering the genetic material.
It's like a seed bank, wasn't it?
It was a seed bank, absolutely. And in addition to that, they put an Anunnaki navigator on board with his son, Ziusudra, so he made sure he made it to Mount Ararat safely. And that's when Enlil and Enki had it out, because that's when Enki divulged to him on Mount Ararat to Enlil that Ziusudra was his son. That's why he saved him.
Well, now, Gerald, because you don't have a website, I'm curious, where do we get your book, The Anunnaki of Niburu?
Well, it's on Amazon.
Okay, so you made it.
It's also available on Kindle. So if you want to go in and see what tables of figures and some of the stuff I put in there, and to get a sense of it, you can see that in Kindle right now.